Now entering Nerdist.com.
Hey, computer thingy?
Are you talking to me?
Yes, biographical information, please, on Mark Altman.
Mark Altman is the writer-producer of Free Enterprise, the award-winning feature film, starring Eric McCormack and William Shatner. He was awarded the Best New Writer Award at the 1998 AFI Film Festival in Los Angeles by the Writers Guild of America. He is a huge Star Trek fan, and he doesn't like you.
I'm sorry?
You, Ken. Mark Altman does not like you.
No, I'm pretty sure you're wrong.
No, you are wrong.
I think you're confusing, disagreeing with being disagreeable.
And I think you are confusing Mark Altman with someone else.
All right, let's give this a listen.
Mission Log Supplemental. Number 4. The one with Mark Altman.
All right, so we're here with Mark Altman, who is the writer and producer of Free Enterprise. And again, if any of our listeners have not seen Free Enterprise, what are you doing? Please go get that movie. It will speak to you personally. I can vouch for that. He also created Sci-Fi Universe magazine and published Cinefantastique. And he created the original and is now relaunched Geek magazine. So do check that out. He's also a panelist on one of my favorite Comic-Con panels, which is the Starship Smackdown. And his current show, Femme Fatales, is out on DVD. Season 1 is out on DVD right now. So, Mark, you made the ultimate movie about Star Trek fans, Free Enterprise. And we can talk specifics about that movie. But, of all the things geeky that you are into, why is Star Trek the one that you always come back to?
That's a good question. It was probably, my first love in popular culture. I was a fan of Star Trek long before Star Wars came out, dating myself a little now. But there all the cliches that people throw at you, the optimism, the hopefulness, but the sense of family. And I think it was the dynamism of not only the performances of people like Shatner and Nimoy and D. Kelly, but also the incredible, rich storytelling. I've always been, I was a huge original Star Trek fan. I continue to this day to be a original Star Trek fan and just a general fan of the universe. And it's been really interesting to see the way that the franchise has evolved over all these years. Free Enterprise, it's sort of very satisfying that was my first movie because it really is a love letter to Star Trek, and to have the chance to work with Bill Shatner, on my first experience, having been a journalist and then becoming a filmmaker, was really, really satisfying, particularly because we had a great experience with Bill. I mean, there are a lot of cliches about, Shatner, and, all I can say is from my personal experience that he was absolutely delightful. And I think a lot of that had to do with the respect with which we treated him, and the reverence and the irreverence. I think that's important as well. So it really was a great experience. I mean, I've told this story a lot at conventions and in press and on the DVD. But when we originally approached him about doing the movie, we had the financing already, but we didn't have Bill, which is not the way to do a film. And we sent him what we call now, or he calls, the tear-stained letter. And we appealed to him why he should do this movie. And at the time we were, pointing out that Burt Reynolds changed his image in Boogie Nights, and Kim Basinger in LA Confidential. And, you were so brilliant at comedy, looking at your Saturday Night Live skit, Get a Life, but of course on Fridays. And, we point to all this stuff, never mentioning Star Trek once, and he finally, he called us and he said, guys, I'm not going to do your movie. And, then we just had to be relentless, sort of like the Doomsday Machine, and you just convince him to do it. And, we found an opening, and eventually he said, look, if you changed it from this to that, and at the time he was sort of like Humphrey Bogart and Played Against Ham, sort of a fictional construct of these guys who, sort of looked to them for their advice about love and loss and everything, and said, what if I were real and I was a screwed up character? I'm not saying I will do your movie. I probably still won't do it, but, I'd look at that. And we rewrote it in about a week, and he did the picture, and the rest, as they say, is history. But, I'm so gratified because, to this day, people come up to me and, say how much they love the movie, and and I get recognized a lot for it more than anything else. And but recently, I think it was at San Diego, this one kid comes up to me and says, I was doing bad. I was in a bad place. I think my life was going down a bad road, and my parents basically took away everything I had. And, they said, you can keep one thing. And he said, free enterprise. And he said, it really turned my life around. And it got me passionate about books and, about traveling and about, realizing this whole world, this universe. And it changed my life. And now I see him from time to time at different events. I saw him recently at the screening they did for the release of the Star Trek original series CDs, and he's doing great. And I always remember that kid because, I'm sure the people who actually do the series hear these stories all the time. I became a doctor. I became a lawyer. I became maybe not a lawyer. I became a doctor, as an engineer. And but for us to have done this little low budget, trifle, and to have that kind of response was really gratifying.
I got to say, it's been a long time since I've seen Free Enterprise, but there are two things that have always stuck out to me. The first is your totally righteous hatred for pan and scan DVDs.
Right.
But the other one is, Shatner parodying Shatner, which is kind of like his third thing now. I mean, there was Kirk, there was T.J. Hooker, and then there seems to have been... Are you telling me that was his idea? That he was like, yeah, I'll play me, but weird?
Yes and no, because we already had this character of Shatner who was this goofy kind of like crazy wild man, but he was fictional. It was his idea. No, this is really me. This is, and his big admonition to us was tear me down, and we did. And occasionally it would go a little too far. And he said, well, that's a little too much. And I remember there was one time where we were sitting in his office and he was sort of telling us stuff that had really happened to him. And then he would want us to, and we did, skew it a little differently so it wasn't exactly the story, which is what happened in the special edition. There's this great scene that, I don't know, we cut out of the theatrical version. I don't know why we did. It was stupid. Where he talks about running into a burning building and trying to save a kid and coming out and realizing he wasn't Captain Kirk, but then sort of a glimmer in his eye and saying, but I had to try. And that really happened to him on a beach where he tried to save a kid who was drowning, and then he realized he was drowning too. And it was a fabulous story, and sort of having him be this resource was incredible. And he never ceased to amaze me. I mean, there was this great story when we were in Cannes with him, and we were the first people to ever take him to the Cannes Film Festival. He presented a prop from the movie to Planet Hollywood. In Planet Hollywood Cannes, which was pretty surreal for us as the filmmakers to be there with Captain Kirk giving this thing to Planet Hollywood. And he tells the story about, I play this character, and so I went and got this bomber jacket in this old, five and dime store, and I found out it belonged to the great World War I flying ace, Eddie Rickenbacker, and it came to me from Germany, and now I'm giving it to you here in France, and da-da-da, and it was this wild story, and he went on much longer and with much more panache than I'm telling it. And when he came off the stage, I'm like, Bill, that's incredible. We had no idea. And he goes, I made it up. And that's the kind of showman that he is. And it's funny because we really were at the beginning of the reinvention of Shatner, this third phase of his career you talk about. And it sort of irks me and my collaborator Rob Burnett that we never get the credit we deserve, because like even in his own book Get a Life, he glosses over Free Enterprise. And the funny thing is, at the time he had told Priceline about this movie he was doing, and they said, oh really, we're thinking about doing something with him, like singing in a club, and we hear you have him sing in a club and rapping, and can you send us just to take a look at? And we sent him some stuff, and I was joking, I didn't even get any free plane tickets out of it, let alone stock on it. So it's very very, very frustrating, because of course then he went on to be the big giant head in Third Rock, and of course Boston Legal, and the whole as you say parodying of Shatner. But I'm surprised you don't mention the most important conversation in Free Enterprise. I would have thought you would have pointed that out, which, of course, is the This Side of Paradise conversation when Shatner shows up in Mark's office. And Mark is that's why I got such a kick listening to your podcast, because Mark's very upset that Rob has been hanging out with this girl instead of like palling around and going out drinking and carousing with him. And so he wants to break them up. And Shatner is like, being... you can't do that. That's not right. He's found love, whatever. And then, Mark is like, you didn't sound like that when Mr. Spock was infected by the spores and he was farming and he was happy too, and you screwed it all up for him. And I'm paraphrasing because there's a lot of profanity in that scene, but it was funny because listening to your podcast reminded me of that scene, which is actually one of the last things I wrote for that movie, because I felt like we needed a couple more sort of Star Trek references, and it had come to me that, wow, this was really a great analogy for what was going on between the characters of Mark and Rob, the whole Omicron Ceti 3. And in fact, I think he mentions Omicron Ceti 3 in the movie. I haven't watched it in a while either, but I remember this conversation. So it was really funny that you invited me to this side of paradise because, of course, that's such an important part of the metaphor for free enterprise.
Well, can I tell you something honest and true? I did not invite you to talk about and that's absolutely true. In fact, when Rod said we want to do an episode and it's just going to be about this side of paradise, a supplemental about this side of paradise, I believe my exact words were, I don't wanna.
Well, I can understand after those ridiculous pronouncements you made in the podcast why you would not want to talk about it anymore. Well, oh, yes, let's all be on drugs forever and not let...
we'll get into this in a minute, and I'm going to bust out a little Shakespeare on you.
Oh, okay.
I'll just warn you right now.
In the tradition of Star Trek. Let's talk about Star Trek. Let's break out Shakespeare when we don't want to actually talk about something.
Well, here's
no, but the one thing I was going to say really quickly is there was a third thing that does always stick in my mind about Free Enterprise, and we can go back to talking about Star Trek, but I just have to say it was a fantastic thing where Shatner is sitting there talking to them about doing his version of Julius Caesar and playing all the principals. And one of the characters says, doesn't that mean you'll have to stab yourself in the back? And he says, well, I've done it before. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's just, yeah. So, yes, I'm going to second what John said a minute ago. If you haven't seen Free Enterprise, go do it now.
Yeah. Well, I just love how much fun Bill, the Brits would say, taking the piss out of himself.
Yeah.
And, he's great. And he really was, he was fearless. And, I think even there was a time where he said, like, did I go too far? And, he was concerned, like, he was going to really screw up his career by doing this. And then people would really confuse that character with the way he really was. And it ended up being, it paved the way for, I think, this twilight of his career, which has been so fantastic. And, it was so much fun. And he was so game because, it was a small independent film. So there were some really late nights and rainy nights. And, he was, always up and bouncing off the walls. And it was great. And I got to tell him the story. I had a good friend of mine who's also a very talented TV producer. He told me the story about how Al Pacino had just screened Generations at the time and was such a fan of Shatner's, and he was sort of bagging on Patrick. And I was telling Shatner the story to amuse him because basically we're sitting around waiting to shoot, waiting for the lights to get set up, and Shatner really got a kick out of it. I also have another Shatner this side of paradise story kind of thing. It's all flooding back to me now. But I remember there's a line where we mention, Jill Ireland, and a lot of people say, how much does Bill really remember of the original Star Trek? It's been so long. But he was the one who said, look, let's call her by her character's name because, the actress actually died of cancer and maybe it could be perceived as being disrespectful. And it was really funny because, Rob and I were trying not to let on we were these huge Star Trek fans because he actually treated us with respect. And he couldn't believe that we'd financed a movie and we're doing all this stuff and successful in the business and actually loved Star Trek. And so it was really funny because he said, well, so find out what character Jill Ireland played. Maybe they have these encyclopedias. You can look it up and find out what the character's name was or these books, or you could do some research and then come back and change the script. And we both did, Leela Colomi? Look at us. And it was sort of like, what is going on here?
Well, you mean to say that you were able to keep up this ruse?
The charade.
Here's this script that is so, from page one, it is so full of Star Trek fan love that he didn't think that the two writers of the film weren't fans?
Well, I think he thought we were geniuses who were trying to cash in on Star Trek. But somehow we realized there was this incredible phenomenon called Star Trek. And maybe if we could get the fans of the show to come see our movie, it was a way to capitalize on this, burgeoning fan culture. and that we had done research and somehow come up with this crazy movie, not realizing that we were, fans. And look, we always tell these stories, these anecdotes. But it was funny because I remember, we were in his office doing a notes meeting, and Ricardo Montalbaum called, and he's sitting there, hello Ricardo, and we were laughing and we look at each other like we can't believe he's talking to Khan. It's not John Harrison, he's talking to Khan, and we're very excited, and they're looking at each other and talking, and we're just like, this is great, this is just like in the movie. They talk on a communicator, but they never meet. And it was like, so we had all these Star Trek moments, but it was nothing that we ever was shared. Although, it was funny because Shatner always pleads ignorance to a lot of Star Trek. But I remember one time we were talking about the Gamesters of Triskelion and how hot Angelique Pettyjohn was, and he sort of comes up to us in the bookstore and he goes, who's Angelique Pettyjohn? He does it with sort of a wink, like where they had been together, and like he knew exactly who she was, but he's like playing coy, and it was a great moment, and that was a really fun night because it was late. We were in the bookstore in the valley, and it was literally, we were in the middle of El Nino. The water was like close to flooding into the store. It was just horrible, and we were just waiting for somebody to get electrocuted. There were all these cables, and it was just. But he was up, and it was fun, and we had the whole Mein Kampf bit with Eric McCormick that I'd come up with on the spot, which was just really fun. And McCormick was great and great ad-libber, and he did that whole physical comedy where he trips over the sofa, which is a really fun bit of business that he came up with, and and then Rob had given them the Twilight Zone book that they end up. It was just there was a lot of stuff we were inventing on the fly, and Shatner was the one I think who said he picks up the Barely Legal and he's reading it, and that's when they meet him, and it was like he was totally like are you sure you're okay with this? It's like yeah, and, between takes he's sitting there reading Barely Legal. It was really funny.
All right, so the reason you're here, Mark, I don't know if you know this, but when we did our episode of Mission Log for This Side of Paradise, we got, Ken, wouldn't you say, more listener response than anything we've talked about up until now? It's kind of remarkable.
If by we got more listener response, you mean I got more listener response. And if by response, you mean... what are you on drugs? Yeah, as our esteemed guest.
Well, wait a minute. I'll start it out. I'll throw you a bone here, Ken, because the first comment that we got from Facebook, Rick Tetro, says, I've been watching this episode for 40 plus years, and Ken, you just gave me something new to think about, new to ponder. Well done, sir. Should we just stop there? Are we?
Yeah, I think so. Let's call it a day.
Well, here's the thing,
now, should you recap for people who didn't hear the last? Because I did listen to it. Yes, there may be people who haven't heard what you guys did. Can you distill it down, the Cliff Notes version of sort of what the debate was? And I have a lot of respect for you, sort of putting that out there. It is a very contrarian point of view, and it is very interesting. It's nuts, but it's very interesting. Yeah. So maybe you can just sort of sum up sort of the debate you guys had.
Well, it kind of comes down to this. My point was that the spores in This Side of Paradise, even though they are creating a kind of happiness for the settlers on Omicron,
we called it a happiness pill back in the 20th century.
Yeah, yes, you would. Yeah,
dating Star Trek immensely.
It was a false construct, and it essentially stopped those settlers from achieving anything more. Now, Ken was presenting the position that what does it matter? They were happy. And Ken, I'll defend you here because I think the thing that you're presenting is kind of a bigger discussion about, well, what is happiness? When we say happiness, are we just saying that it is a thing, that it's something that we can achieve? And if you are happy, as is the case with the settlers on Omicron Ceti 3, if you are happy, who's to say that you shouldn't be or couldn't be?
Okay.
He doesn't want to open the can of worms again.
Well, there's more to it than that, but you're go ahead and summarize your position again.
You can say that it's like, okay, you can say that it's a deeper examination of happiness if you want to, and I don't think there's any way we can avoid getting into a deeper examination of happiness. But I do want to clear up one thing. A lot of the blowback that I got was people saying, well, Spock this and the crew of the Enterprise that. I never made the case that Kirk should have stayed on that planet, nor did I make the case that Kirk should have let his crew stay on that planet. The case that I made was that they should have let the colonists stay on that planet. Now, maybe we don't have enough information to know whether the colonists should have been there or not, but it felt to me very much like they just went in and decided the fate of the colonists in a way that was different than, Return of the Archons or other settlements. But go ahead, have at me. I'm used to it now.
But George Takei gave the same performance as Archons. Whenever he's like possessed by a happiness, he's like does the same shtick. It's pretty funny.
Yeah, no, it was actually what was the episode, John? You and I just did. What was it?
Cat's Paw? No, not
Which
yet. You're not
one?
second season.
The one we just did, like earlier today.
Sitting on the Edge of Forever.
Thank you. He does the same thing in City on.
That little episode.
Well,
yes.
forgive me, we're tossing him around left and right, but yeah, I mean, he gives him the two. Here, I'll remember this. He gives him the 2 drops of cordrazine,
right?
And Sulu comes up with just that same goofy smile. I mean, which I shouldn't say it's a goofy smile. I love Takei. No, okay, it's a goofy smile.
Sitting on the Edge Forever has some of the greatest scenes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Even that little scene just when they're about to go through the Guardian and, sort of everyone's wishing them well, whatever world they're going to find themselves. And, Nichelle says, happiness at least. It's just it always gets me. It's like, it's such a great episode. But anyway,
Yes.
I'm trying to avoid the unhappy truth of telling Ken that he's out of his mind. First of all, Sandoval, at the end, he admits after he's off the drug, when he's not high anymore, he basically says, we haven't done anything. We haven't produced anything. I mean, I know you guys were even not knocking. That's not the right thing. You're saying, well, they're on the Disney Ranch, so it's like these old-fashioned buildings. But I get the sense that as settlers, they were sort of looking for an earlier way of life. They were looking to reclaim, like, sort of the past, give up technology and go back to, more primitive way of doing things, which were more hands-on and touchy-feely and without technology. So I didn't mind the fact that the colony wasn't sort of like a colony out of aliens, that it was sort of a 1960s backlot. But but the thing is, like I said, I think even Sandoval realizes, and there's a great speech earlier on when they talk about, Shatner's, Shatner's great in the episode. I mean, it's really his episode, because what I think people don't even notice is that, there's a good 10 minutes where he's just walking around the ship, and no one else, and he holds your interest. I mean, it takes a really interesting actor to sort of command your attention doing nothing. And literally all he's doing is like walking around, touching a few buttons, sitting in the chair, getting up from the chair, going down, getting his Samsonite, as you so accurately pointed out, getting his medals, his little Cub Scout medals and everything. And I think that and it's a great sequence.
Wait. Hold on a second. You're blowing my mind right now, though. It seemed like John's argument, and correct me if I'm wrong, John, it seems like John's argument was that they were actually supposed to be, doing this whole thing where they're producing food for other colonies or something like that. You're saying that you believe that these guys were on this planet to have sort of this simpler life, this agrarian life, which they end up with, but they also end up with happiness. I mean, if you're saying that was the reason they went there, then what is it that they didn't accomplish exactly?
Well, I think that they want to have, maybe they want to have kids. They want to have, they want to produce. They want to be a productive member of the Federation, but do it in a different kind of way. Not like that up the long ladder kind of way where they're carrying pigs on the Enterprise or anything. But I think that they definitely, have, aspirations, not just to sort of, because they want to have their own thoughts and wits about them. I mean, literally, we all know this episode is a metaphor for sort of what was going on in the 60s, people dropping LSD and the Timothy Leary, tune in, drop out kind of thing. And it's like, oh, wouldn't it be great to just be stoned all the time and live on Omicron 73 and have sex with Jill Ireland? Well, that's great, but it gets old after a while. And, I think, really what Kirk says is, I think the point you made was, well, he's selfish. He doesn't want to lose his friends and lose his command and lose his ship. But I don't think that's the case at all, because, and the reality is that once the Enterprise disappeared, and they sort of settled in for a little bit, Starfleet's going to send another ship after them to see what the hell happened. And they're still going to have the same situation. The next captain's going to come and say, okay, you're all coming with me. And they're going to introduce him to spores. I mean, it's just like eventually this paradise is going to last. Paradise never lasts. I mean, it goes back, if you believe in the Bible, to Eden. Paradise, people are just not meant to live in paradise. It's hard to perpetuate that. And you can't appreciate paradise if you're perpetually living in it. And again, these people don't have their wits about it. They don't have control over their own thoughts and their aspirations and the desire to achieve and create great poetry and great literature and all the things that make a civilization. They're just sort of stalling and treading water, and it obviously evokes memories of stuff like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which was much more sinister. We're told the spores are benevolent here, but at the end of the day, the result is the same. It's a completely stagnant culture in which, people are going around smiling. And it's not that much different than Return of the Archons. In that case, Landru, had them under his thumb. But in this case, even if it's benevolent, these people self-will their personal identities. McCoy has so much to offer. That whole great conversation about, we don't need doctors anymore. You can, start farming. Well, he didn't train all these years to be a farmer. He wants to be a doctor. He wants to help people. And to have that stripped away from him is sad.
No, I agree that having that stripped away from him is sad, but here's the thing. That only happens when Sandoval comes to give him a job besides sitting under the tree, and that only happens after Kirk does his little, thing with the supersonic whatever from the Enterprise that's pissing everybody off. You're right. There has not been a utopia that has worked to this point. Does that mean we give up on the idea? We're saying right now that, this never works. Well, no, this hasn't worked to this point. But guess what else hasn't worked to this point? Teleporters and phasers and starships and warp speed and all of these things that we aim toward. But the one thing that we are going to hold on to this whole time is the fact that, but we're still going to have to slog. We're still going to have to slog it out. You know why? Because we always have. That just stops me right there. That just stops me because then I don't see the point in all of it, because what's going to end up at the top of all of that is some guy who says, you want to teleport? That'll be $80. What this all ends up with is somebody still having it over somebody else. And we have to be trying to aim towards a place where we're not doing that. If we're just going to say that every time we come across happiness, and it is very different to me than Return of the Archons, because that was a group of people who wanted something different and they weren't really getting any benefit from it. These guys are getting health,
mint juleps. They're getting lots of mint juleps.
Oh yeah, you're not going to get me to argue against that. Well, I want a Kentucky mint julep, or what we actually call a mint julep. Let's assume
that they did stay.
Yeah,
that Kirk went along. They all
stayed. Stop. That was never my argument. That was never my argument.
Annihilate. All those little parasites would have destroyed the planet, moved on. The Doomsday Machine would have leveled the universe. They would have not, the good of the many outweighs the good of the one. Even if Spock could have stayed and been happy. Had Kirk not done what he did, think of what the Enterprise could not have achieved in protecting the Federation. This is so geeky. Protecting the Federation and the galaxy. All the greatness that they left. Saving the Khitomer Conference. None of this stuff would have happened if they were sitting, farming, and growing plants on Omicron Ceti 3. It would also have been a very boring show for the next couple of seasons.
Well, that's true. That's very true. My argument, though, again, go back and listen. My argument was never that the Enterprise should have stayed. What I said was that Kirk should have done what he had to do to get his crew off of there because they had a mission and they had commitments that they had to make. At the end of that time, though, they should have been allowed to go back to where the colonists were. Forcing the colonists off is the thing that bothers me, and it's the same sort of thing as like, hey, Native Americans, we bought you Bibles and pants, so, come be like us.
They were sent by Starfleet, so they had to live under the rules of Starfleet, and Kirk was under orders to get them back.
Okay, I don't disagree with examine that, though. Why? Why was that the order? Because here's the thing. Starfleet was not that concerned. It's been 3 years.
Admiral Comac?
Absolutely. It's been 3 years since we have heard from these people. They were not on a rescue mission. They were not on a mercy mission. They had not received any sort of distress call. They went down to that planet expecting to find bodies. They wanted to find out what had happened. So it wasn't like, we really need this food in this quadrant. We're not getting that. Go find out what's going on or see if you can save these people. Starfleet left these guys for dead. And then when they got around to going to find out what happened to them, 3 years after they heard from them last, Then they find out that they're alive, and all of a sudden, well, it's very important that we get them off this planet because this is not right for them. Oh, it was right for them when we thought they were dead.
Maybe they wanted to examine them to find out why they were immune to the Berthold rays, and they could help another colony that was being hurt by Berthold rays. I mean, other societies that were threatened by the Berthold rays. I mean, who knows? But at the end of the day, Kirk was following the orders of Starfleet Command, and who's to say that they wouldn't have been allowed to go back had they just said, look, we were happy there, we were not in danger, and we want to go back, and we understand, and maybe they would have been allowed to go back. But I think ultimately the fact that Sandoval at the very end, comes to terms with the fact that, now that I'm no longer high, now that I'm no longer infected with these spores, oh my God, what was I doing? I was like eating all the cookies and running around naked through the quad. He realizes that this thing was not good, and that, now that he's sobered up, he hadn't accomplished anything, and there's things he wants to do. And the only person who really gets screwed in the whole situation is Jill Ireland.
Yeah.
Figuratively and literally. But I think that, it's validated by the ending that, everyone's sort of happy to be off the spores.
I'll read another comment here from a listener. Ed Severn sent us an email saying, I also love this side of paradise, but I disagree with Ken. The people in that episode are artificially happy. They can no longer think for themselves. They are addicted to those spores. The message is simple. Stay away from addictive drugs. And one of the other comments that kept coming up quite a bit was very frequently using the word consent. The biggest problem here for a lot of our listeners was that there was no consent from those who were being infected by the spores. Now, Ken, you mentioned, and we talk about this a lot on our show, about how there are technologies or beings or advancements seem to get abandoned by the Enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
We just talked about the Guardian of Forever. Well, here's this incredible power that now we just abandon.
Well, do we? Have you read the fan fiction?
Well, we're only sticking with canon here. But,
well, yesteryear they had set up a base, and they clearly were not just leaving it for somebody.
We'll get to that one for sure.
Never mind. Hey, I just have to say one thing. I don't know if you've heard this or if you can dig this up, but there's an incredible public service announcement from the early 70s that Shatner and Nimoy do in character against quote unquote hard drug abuse. And it's basically they find a planet and which is basically the populace is being, dying off. And Spock says, this is very similar to the 20th century phenomenon of hard drug abuse. And Shatner goes on and is talking about the terrors of hard drive. It's hysterical. And it's all the sound effects and everything. And I think they probably recorded it when they were doing the animated series. Right. But if you can dig that up, it is one of the great pieces of Star Trek kitsch I've ever heard.
Pretty great.
And in fact, I think my friend Darren actually took stuff from the animated series and put it to the audio from the PSA. But it's because you mentioned the whole fact of that, or this reader or the guy who listened to the podcast is saying that it's basically saying stay off drugs, which I don't know if it's saying stay off drugs as much as it's saying don't be perpetually on drugs.
I personally, I think the whole drug analogy is kind of a fallacy, though. Because the drugs that you're talking about, I mean, you talk about coke, heroin, meth, whatever, they all are detrimental to the body and to, not the Landru body, but, detrimental to the human body and to accomplishing what you do want to accomplish. They went there to have this agrarian life, and they got this agrarian life. And as a bonus, they were happy and they were healed. I mean, they I don't know why it restored tonsils. That's kind of a drag because you might just have to have those taken out again. Same with an appendix. But, I mean, you end up with a better human or a more complete human at the end of time on this planet than you had when you started.
But here's the thing.
I mean, that sort of kills the whole drug analogy for me because drugs kill. Speed kills, coke, meth, blah, blah, blah. They all do bad things to the physical body, whereas this thing was actually doing good things to the physical body and pleasing them at the same time.
See, I disagree with the idea that this is some sort of a purely benevolent drug or being.
I know you do, and that's why you brought in reinforcements. I'm wise to your game, mister.
Well, John, to his credit, did not know how I felt about this issue until I arrived. So
not at all.
When Rod asked me to do the podcast, I listened to it and I said, "What is this crazy nonsense?"
So if we're blaming anybody, let's blame Rod.
Yeah, well, it's like I do.
Yeah. But here's the thing: the spores have at least enough of a draw on the people who are infected by the spores that then those people are determined to infect everybody else around them. What's the first thing that McCoy does? He starts beaming up more of the plants in the Enterprise. They decide, well, our goal is to infect every single human being that we can get our hands on.
I don't know that I agree, though, because, I mentioned this, I think, in the episode. In Little Shop of Horrors, Audrey, too, comes to Earth with the intention not only of, feeding on the people, but also growing more Audrey 2s and taking over the planet and then moving on. This plant seems to have no interest in getting off planet.
No, it's very benevolent.
Well,
they say that it's just taken host in the plants, that they're actually, the spores have been traveling and found a home in the plants, and then the plants are, but I agree with you that they don't have a sinister intent a la Invasion of the Body Snatchers, although I will say Leonard Nimoy gave the same performance in that he gave in This Side of Paradise, and then, or as you say, if anything, this thing is analogous to This Way to Eden, where, they're looking for they should have just gone to Omicron City 3. They would have been a lot happier, Then go and try to find that planet with the poison apples. It's a recurring theme. It's interesting on a deeper level of the show is the Star Trek characters never being thrown out of paradise. And, I think it's interesting given that, Gene Roddenberry was an atheist, that, he's so fascinated by sort of these, godlike beings and sort of the being expelled from paradise. Because we see it again and again. And, I just want to say, Ken, since you're so fond on letting them stay on drugs, basically, maybe in Star Trek V, Kirk should have just let everybody fall under the sway of Cybok and hang out with God on, Nimbus 3 or whatever.
Yeah, except he was up to something nefarious. There's a difference.
Not necessarily. They were happy.
Let me go back for a second, though. Don't you think that that's I don't want to say a symptom, but don't you think that that's something that both atheists and agnostics do? There has to be a fascination with God. It seems to me the people who are least interested in really contemplating God are the ones who already know what they believe, right? They've already kind of decided.
That's true, and I think again that's something that's so incredible about Star Trek and what Gene did is that in the '60s that there was a show dealing with these kind of issues, and even something as small as you remember early in This Side of Paradise, one of the settlers is African American. It's just a throwaway character. You just don't see that kind of stuff on television in the '60s. We look at it now and we think, oh, there's nothing really, it wouldn't even register to us. But just the fact that one of the colonists is, you look at what was going on in Alabama and Mississippi and all this stuff and at the time and with desegregation, and yet it's treated as completely not even worthy of note. The fact that the colonists are, Asian and African American and it's just. It's the kind of thing that is sort of lost through the mist of time. We all talk about the interracial kiss in Plato's Stepchildren. But what Star Trek did in terms of breaking down barriers is so much more than that. It's just worth noting. And I'm not trying to change the subject from your craziness, Ken. I just wanted to point it out, because it was something that I was thinking about. And just, rewatching the episode, I was, really, it just reminded me of that fact that, how just how incredible the original Star Trek was, and in presaging technology. Again, the fact that we're 40 years on, or close to 50, and that so much of what Star Trek introduced is coming true. It's amazing. It's not 300 years later. It's 40 years later. But these are things that people weren't even speculating about at the time. You wouldn't even find them in science fiction books, and it's just it's really remarkable, and that's why I'm always so indignant when people sort of trash the original as looking cheesy, or when you look at the budget that they were doing it on, and sort of the amazing vision that they had, which no matter whether you love the subsequent series or don't like them, they never had the kind of vision in terms of postulating the future, in terms of really reinventing the aesthetic that the original show so successfully did. Because even though it's such a stepchild of Forbidden Planet, Forbidden Planet, sort of it's the flying saucer and it's ray guns and a robot, and I love Forbidden Planet. Don't get me wrong, but Star Trek really was a quantum leap from that in terms of everything. The giant big screen TV, in the bridge and Bluetooth and the sliding doors. I mean, that's the thing. If you didn't grow up watching in the 60s, which I don't think any of us did. But even then, it wasn't until the mid 70s that sort of sliding doors became sort of de rigueur. So again, I hate to change the subject so dramatically, but it's something that I really feel like I need to proselytize for, because more and more I hear, it's so dated, it's so this, it's so that. And, I hadn't watched an original Star Trek in quite a long time until I rewatched This Side of Paradise. And, I thought, am I still going to feel the love? And, more than anything, it impressed me with just how amazing that episode is.
Yeah, this is one of the questions that we actually always ask at the end of each episode. Does the production stand the test of time? And we've pretty much had to go ahead and acknowledge at the beginning of every episode that this is always going to be a piece of television made in the 1960s. So if you're looking for, photorealistic and can you believe the way that ship blew up and, can you believe how cool that effect was, then you're always going to say no. But we're not doing that. We're trying very hard to not do that. I mean, to watch it both in terms of what people were watching at the time, what else they had available to them, and then the kind of thing.
And
that you're
women are
about.
always going to avoid answering a question too.
That kills me. See, because you mentioned. I mean, we've talked a lot about the great multicultural and multiracial presentation of the future that Star Trek brings. Sexist as the day is long, though. But that's a whole other thing for a whole other.
I don't want to change the conversation, but it is a subject that we discussed at length for Geek. For the next issue of Geek, we did a Star Trek roundtable with myself and Rod and Scott Mance from Access Hollywood and Brandon Braga and David Goodman, who just wrote that wonderful book, Federation, the First 150 Years. And we talk at length about the sexism. And, of course, I'm saying the great failing of Star Trek was in a way, its sexism. When you look at stuff like Turnabout Intruder, a woman can't be but when you really think about it, that was Fred Freiberger in the third season. If you go back and look earlier, you look at stuff like Gene Roddenberry putting a woman second in command of the ship in the cage, and it was the network that didn't allow that. And even as Scott pointed out, and I won't take credit for this, somebody like Nancy Hedford, who was the Hillary Clinton of her time, she was being sent to negotiate a peace between these warring planets, and that's all she cared about. She was this incredible diplomat, and she was a woman. So yes, there are these moments of sexism, but given that it was the 60s, it actually is, we don't ever approach, other than Turnabout Intruder, a level of Mad Men-like sexism. It's actually very progressive in a lot of respects. And, Spock telling Jill Ireland it's just like a woman never to answer a question. It's not as bad as some of the other stuff. And there may be a little truth to that.
It recurs from time to time, though. I can't remember the what's the one? I am so bad with the titles. I apologize. The Amusement Planet.
Oh, Shore Leave.
Oh, Shore Leave.
How can you not know Shore Leave?
It's
everything you've argued this whole episode.
I know
Shore Leave.
I know Shore Leave. I just forget the titles of things. But there's this whole thing where, so Sulu finds a gun, and they see. I can't remember what the different things are that happen, but nobody has any problem believing that any of the things happen just the way the men say it happened. But then when the woman says that she saw, I believe, a knight. Right. Oh, come on! Did this really happen? Really? Mm-hmm. I mean, after 15 minutes of...
I'd believe anything Yeoman Barrows told me.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the differences between you and Kirk then, because he was just like, no. See, but you're a girl though, so I'm gonna doubt what you say.
No, I actually agree with that. And of course, their fantasies are all these macho fantasies, even Sulu, and they're all these macho fantasies. And Yeoman Barrows is to be swept away by a knight in shining armor. So yeah, I agree about that. And of course, she has the fancy dress ball gown, the princess gown.
Princess gown, yeah.
But it's also why it's the first episode I showed my 4-year-old kids. Was the Shore Leave, because I thought it was something that they would enjoy.
Well, We see the
too soon though.
we see the Princess Gown turn back up in the Squire of Gothos as well. And I'm just going to throw out titles now when I can.
And you did make a good point in the last podcast about how This Side of Paradise is tracked with all this music from Alexander Courage music from The Cage, and then a lot of music from Shore Leave, and it works extremely well in the episode. I don't know if you talked about this amazing set that La La Land Records put out, the complete original Star Trek music, the 12 CDs. But it's made me spend a lot more time listening to the original Star Trek music, and it's just brilliant. I mean, it's just brilliant. And that said, if you don't have it, and you can save up to afford it, you should get it. It is it's just incredible. And there are a couple of cues that weren't used in the show that are great, and the liner notes are fantastic. And my good friend Jeff Bond worked on it, and the guys at La La Records did an amazing job. And there's a cue, which ironically from I think from the Enterprise incident, that's an episode of Star Trek, Ken, is called Free Enterprise. And I thought that was great. It was from the cue sheet, and I never knew that when we named Free Enterprise. So, but that's a shameless plug for that set because it's amazing, and I highly recommend it.
I will say I'm thoroughly enjoying not talking about This Side of Paradise, but I do want to.
I was looking at more viewer mail here, and just ready to throw another one out.
Well, I was going to say I do want to go ahead and hit one specifically because I said that I would do a little bit of Shakespeare.
Right.
Michael, due respect to Spock. But he got it wrong. He wasn't truly happy for the first time in his life. Maybe he felt truly happy for the first time, but it wasn't real happiness. The Shakespeare quote that it made me think of was in Hamlet. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern ask Hamlet how he's doing, and he likens his life as Prince of Denmark to being in prison. And they don't get it, saying, how cool they think Denmark is and how cool they think Hamlet's life is, to which he replies, why then 'tis none to you, for there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. To me it is a prison. This idea that kept coming back from a lot of the emails was, well, they're not really happy. Well, define it. Define really happy. There also seemed to be this sort of, going back to something that we were talking about earlier, this idea of, well, they didn't work for it, or, I don't understand that part of it. I don't understand the whole of, there's like an idea that if you didn't slog, like I mentioned earlier, then any happiness that you get is like a cheat or it's not real. And that's like a Pearly Gates idea. That's like at the end of life, we get to see who has the most toys, or we get to see whether or not we get to go to heaven or hell. It doesn't strike me as actually a thing to aim for.
I don't know. I would have to disagree because I think that there are things in life that sneak up on you that make you happy, that give you, that fire the synapses in the brain or whatever, that give you a sense of happiness or euphoria or whatever, whether it's, your kids or watching a good Star Trek movie or, whatever, sex, and I think that in the case of this, it's a phony happiness because it's brought on not by any true emotion or anything that has happened to them or anything that they have accomplished or done. But it's as they point out, Spock points out, it's a happiness pill. It's purely a chemical reaction that's brought on by the spores, and so it's phony. It's not real.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to kind of compound what you're saying, Mark, if you don't have a contrast by which to hold that happiness, how can you even at some point know what that happiness is? Let's say that those settlers on Omicron Ceti actually reproduced, which apparently they're not doing. They don't have kids, and that doesn't seem to be part of their abilities there. But there is no way for them to see that here's something negative or here's something positive. All they have is this euphoria, which I think is different from happiness. But there's no understanding then of how do you compare that to another emotion, to another state. There's no way to do it. And I think that's what a lot of our listeners were kind of commenting on.
It's like somebody who's on ecstasy running around and thinking they're immensely happy, and then obviously when they come down from the ecstasy, all of a sudden they realize, oh my God, I did all these stupid things, and I wasn't, and it changes the brain patterns in your, in your head. And I think this is like any other drug. I mean, you make the point. Yes, indeed, it doesn't have a detrimental effect. In fact, it has a positive effect on the body. But I think that ultimately, true happiness comes from other things. It's not artificial. It's not from a happiness pill. Or certainly, to sustain it over, what were weeks, months, years, where it's artificially created as opposed to, existing, brought upon by a person's own, the things they've attained on their own or their own relationships or whatever. But, and that's why that takes us back to the drug argument, which I don't think you feel is relevant, but I do feel is the proper metaphor for this episode.
Yeah. Well, I'm really looking forward to getting all these emails again.
Well, at least you didn't bag on City Hunter Forever, I hope, because then you're going to get some real hate mail.
Nothing but praise for that episode. Cool. Thank you very much, Mark Altman, for dropping by to
My
talk
pleasure.
about
and
the
Ken,
huge controversy.
I look forward to hearing
Paradise.
what your many fans have to say. And I hope you have an unlisted telephone number. And
Let's be honest, you look forward to hearing what John's many fans have to say.
Well, go on. All right, so Mark, I hope that you will come back and talk about another episode with us sometime.
that was my pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys.
See, I think you liked me.
And I think he tolerated you, like a physicist tolerates a monkey,
Oh, that seems harsh.
like a man of letters tolerates a monkey,
Okay, I really think you're being unfair.
like the Brady Bunch tolerated Cousin Oliver.
All right, now you've crossed the line.
I'm sorry, did I hurt your monkey Cousin Oliver feelings?
Say goodnight, computer.
Good night, computer.
Now leaving Nerdist.com.